Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that thousands of people around you had died during the night. Not from a war, not from an invading army, but from a judgment that began after a rebellion against Moses. The Bible tells us that 14,700 Israelites died in a plague, but that number was not the beginning of the story. Something terrible had already happened the day before. Before the plague came rebellion, and at the center of that rebellion was a man named Korah, along with Dathan and Abiram. They were not ordinary men. They were influential members of the community, and they were about to challenge the authority of Moses and Aaron. Their argument was simple, but extremely dangerous. The whole congregation is holy. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? They believed Moses and Aaron had taken too much authority for themselves, but Moses understood that this was not merely a disagreement between leaders. This was a challenge to the authority God had given them, and when Moses heard their accusation, the Bible says he fell face down. Moses did not immediately fight back. Instead, he told Korah that the Lord himself would reveal who truly belonged to him. Then Moses proposed a test. Korah and his followers were to take censers, place incense in them, and come before the Lord. The next morning, 250 leaders stood with their censers before the tabernacle. Korah was there, Moses was there, Aaron was there. Then the glory of the Lord appeared before the entire congregation, and something happened that made the entire congregation realize this was far more serious than a political argument. God instructed Moses to separate the people from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Moses warned them not to touch anything belonging to the rebels because judgment was coming. Then Moses made a remarkable statement. He said that if these men died naturally, then the Lord had not sent him. But if something completely extraordinary happened, Moses said, then everyone would know that these men had treated the Lord with contempt. Then Moses finished speaking. Suddenly, the ground beneath the rebels began to split apart. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed the rebels, their households, and everything belonging to them. Then the earth closed over them. The Israelites fled, terrified that the same thing might happen to them. But the judgment was not over. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. The people had witnessed the earth open. They had witnessed fire from the Lord. But somehow, the story was still not finished, because the very next day, the Israelites did something astonishing. Instead of recognizing the seriousness of what had happened, the entire congregation gathered against Moses and Aaron. They accused them of killing the Lord's people. Think about this situation. The day before, the earth had opened, fire had fallen, and now the people were blaming Moses and Aaron. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Moses and Aaron went to the front of the tent, and the Lord spoke to Moses. God told Moses to separate himself from the congregation because judgment was about to fall upon them. The Lord's anger had been kindled, and a plague had begun. But Moses and Aaron did something extraordinary. They did not run away from the people. Instead, Moses told Aaron to take a censer and make atonement for the people. Aaron immediately obeyed. He ran directly into the middle of the assembly, where the plague had already begun. And then comes one of the most powerful images in the entire story. Aaron stood between the dead and the living. He made atonement for the people, and the plague stopped. Then the Bible gives us the number. 14,700 people had died from the plague. And the Bible makes one important clarification. These 14,700 were in addition to those who had already died because of Korah. So this was not one single event where 14,700 people suddenly died at once. There was the rebellion, the opening of the earth, the fire, and then the plague the following day. But now we reach the question that makes this story so difficult. Why would God respond to rebellion with such severe judgment? Why not simply forgive the rebels and move forward? To understand the story, we have to understand what Korah was actually challenging. This was not simply a disagreement about leadership style. Korah and his followers were challenging the order God had established for Israel's worship and priesthood, and the test with the censers was designed to reveal whom God had actually chosen. The judgment was not presented merely as revenge. The bronze censers of the dead were turned into a covering for the altar. The objects connected to the rebellion became a permanent reminder of what had happened. The message was clear. Approaching God was not something to be treated casually. But there is something else we should notice. The people who died in the plague were not the original rebels standing with Korah. According to the text, the plague came after the congregation complained against Moses and Aaron. They accused Moses and Aaron of killing the Lord's people, and once again, the people were turning against the very leaders God had appointed. Yet notice what Aaron did when the plague began. He did not say, "They deserve this." He ran toward them. He placed himself between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. The story of Numbers 16 is disturbing, difficult, and impossible to read casually. It forces us to confront a side of the biblical story that many people would rather avoid. The Bible presents God not only as merciful, but also as holy and capable of judgment. And in Numbers 16, those two realities appear side by side. Judgment came upon the rebellion, but mercy appeared when Aaron ran into the middle of the plague. And perhaps that is one of the most powerful images in the entire chapter. Thousands were dying, but one man ran toward the danger to make atonement for the people. He stood between death and life, and the plague stopped. 14,700 people died that day. But Numbers 16 leaves us with a question that reaches far beyond the wilderness. What happens when people refuse to recognize God's authority? And what does it mean when judgment and mercy appear in the same story? Because in Numbers 16, the story is not only about 14,700 people who died, it is also about the terrifying holiness of God and the mercy of the one who stood between the dead and the living.